Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Lesson 22, the later Crusades. And we're not going to go into nearly as much detail about any of these as we did the First Crusade, but at least you get a little bit of an overview of some of them. Our reflection for the day. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. One major shift that occurred after the First Crusade was the source of the call to go to the east on pilgrimage to battle. The later Crusades did not happen in response to a request from a Byzantine emperor, but out of a need to continue to defend the Crusader states, which faced the threat of invasion from various and sundry Islamic forces once they'd been established. They had treaties with some of the Islamic leaders in the area around them, but there were always new waves of invaders, kind of coming through the area. This threat was not constant. The Crusader states existed in relative peace for about 100 years before the first threat of conquest. But when these threats did arise, the kings and rulers of the Crusader states would appeal to the Pope for assistance. Sometimes this assistance was forthcoming, and sometimes it was not. So let's talk briefly about the Second Crusade. Eventually, the Muslim world began to recover from the Turkish invasion, and major Muslim leaders began to emerge. These men sought to reunite the Islamic world under one ruler. One way that they sought to do this was to try to take the lands that made up the Crusader states and bring them back under Muslim rule. In 1144, the leader Zengi attacked the county of Edessa. This resulted in the Second Crusade, which was called by Pope Eugene III and preached by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. The Second Crusade was the first of the Crusades to be led by European kings, namely Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. This crusade was a complete and utter failure, and in the end, it did more harm than good. The armies of the two kings marched separately across Europe. After crossing Byzantine territory into Anatolia, both armies were separately defeated by the Seljuk Turks, and not much of either army remained afterward. Later, Louis and Conrad and the remnants of their armies reached Jerusalem and participated in an ill-advised attack on Damascus, which ended in their retreat. In the end, again, this crusade was an utter failure, and choices were made during the Second Crusade that would ultimately play a part in the later fall of Jerusalem and give rise to the Third Crusade at the end of the 12th century. Crusaders did see victories elsewhere. The most significant of these came to a combined force of 13,000 Flemish, Frisian, Norman, English, and Scottish and German crusaders in 1147. They were traveling to the Holy Land from England by ship, and the army stopped to help the smaller Portuguese army capture Lisbon, expelling its Moorish occupants. So they end up, kind of by way of their journey, taking part in what is known as the Reconquista that was just referred to in the video we just watched. And I'll be talking about it here in a couple of minutes. The Third Crusade. Amid the political jockeying among the Latin East nobles, successors to Zengi continued to chip away at the Crusader states and weaken them. One of the most famous of the Islamic generals was Saladin, the one whose nephew, the Sultan of Egypt, was befriended by St. Francis of Assisi. Saladin annihilated the entire army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and he soon conquered all of the Kingdom of Jerusalem except for a small portion and a nearby castle. This led to the Third Crusade, which is most famous because this was the crusade that served as the historical backdrop for the Robin Hood stories. This crusade was led by King Richard the Lionhearted of England, King Philip II of France, nominally, and German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. They managed to recover much of the lost territory, but not Jerusalem. The Fourth Crusade. In 1198, Pope Innocent III came to power. He was intensely interested in crusading, and one of his first acts was to promote the Fourth Crusade. This became a complete and utter disaster, and this crusade never reached the Holy Land at all. It was diverted by a disinherited Byzantine prince against the Byzantine emperor who had deposed his father and blinded him. They preferred to do that over killing people. It made them suffer more. They'd blind them and put them in exile. So the son of this deposed emperor who had been blinded diverted some of the crusaders, and this resulted in an attack by crusaders against Constantinople when the prince, whose father had been deposed, did not make good on his promises to the crusaders. Sound like a mess? It was. Basically, the son of this deposed emperor tried to get the crusaders on board with his mission to retake the throne, and then he didn't follow through with his promises, so the crusaders attacked his city. The Byzantines recovered their capital, but the crusade did lasting damage to the empire, and hatred and separation between the Byzantines and the West was cemented. So that hope that many had back before the First Crusade, that going to aid the Byzantines would help to heal the rift, heal the schism, now, a couple centuries later, things are worse. Things are worse than they were before. There's more animosity between the Byzantines and the Christians of the West than there ever was before. The 5th through the 8th Crusades. The 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Crusades accomplished some limited objectives, but none were really successful. The Muslims recovered from the Third Crusade, and in 1291, the Christians were driven from the area. During this time period, it was difficult to get Western Europeans interested in Crusades unless they happened to live in areas bordering Muslims. France and England entered into the 100 Years' War with each other. That distracted them and absorbed their resources. In 1453, the Turks took Constantinople. And finally, that was the end of the Byzantine Empire. It was no more after that. And that ended the crusading movement in the strictest sense. But it didn't end it entirely.